What happens when the person who built everything gets treated like nothing? Today's story will show you exactly how I turned the tables on a family that forgot who made their comfortable lives possible. If you think family loyalty goes one way, you're about to learn otherwise. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Margaret Chen, and at 72 years old, I thought I had earned my place at the family table. For over 4 decades, I had been the cornerstone of the Chen family empire, the woman who turned my late husband's small construction business into a multi-million-dollar real estate development company. When Richard passed away 8 years ago, I didn't just inherit his business. I transformed it into something he never could have imagined. The irony wasn't lost on me that the woman everyone once dismissed as just Richard's wife had become the architect of their prosperity. While my children were busy playing house and pursuing their hobbies, I was negotiating million-dollar contracts and expanding our portfolio across 3 states. The Chen Development Group wasn't just a business anymore. It was a legacy worth over $47 million, and every penny of it had my fingerprints on it. I lived in the family estate in Westfield, Connecticut, a sprawling colonial mansion that I had personally designed and overseen the construction of 5 years earlier. The house sat on 12 acres of pristine land, with gardens that I tended. Myself, despite having the means to hire an army of landscapers. This wasn't just where I lived. It was the headquarters of everything I had built, the symbol of what determination and intelligence could accomplish when given the chance. My eldest son, James, worked for the company in what could generously be called a supervisory role. At 45, he had the title of Vice President of Operations, though his operations mainly consisted of showing up to board meetings and collecting his substantial salary. His wife, Patricia, had never worked a day in her life, but had strong opinions about how the business should be run, especially when it came to the charitable donations I made to various causes she deemed unnecessary. My daughter, Linda, lived in California with her husband, Marcus, and their 2 teenage children. She had moved there 15 years ago, ostensibly to pursue her art career, though the only thing she seemed to pursue with any consistency was spending the monthly allowance I provided. Linda called herself a sculptor, but the only thing she had ever sculpted was a lifestyle funded entirely by the business I had built. My youngest son, Robert, was perhaps the most disappointing of all. At 38, he bounced between careers like a pinball, always with grand plans and always needing financial assistance to get started. His latest venture was a food truck business that had already consumed over $200,000 of what he called family investment and what I called money down the drain. His wife, Nicole, encouraged these ventures while simultaneously complaining that they couldn't afford the lifestyle they wanted. For years, I had watched my children take and take, always assuming that my generosity was their birthright rather than my choice. They attended company events when it suited them, showed up for board meetings when there were decisions that affected their inheritance, and called me when they needed something. But when it came to actually being a family, to showing up for the woman who had sacrificed her own dreams to build theirs, they were mysteriously unavailable. This pattern had been growing more pronounced over the past few years. Birthdays were acknowledged with perfunctory phone calls. Mother's Day brought expensive flowers ordered online with generic cards. Christmas was a tense affair where everyone gathered at my house, exchanged gifts, and left as quickly as possible to get back to their real lives. I had become the obligation they checked off their list, the elderly mother they tolerated rather than celebrated. I should have seen the Thanksgiving exclusion coming, but perhaps I had been too generous in my assumptions about their character. Perhaps I had mistaken their dependence on my wealth for actual affection. The realization that I had been wrong about something so fundamental would prove to be the catalyst for everything that followed. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in early November. I was in my home office, reviewing the quarterly reports. That showed our company had just posted its most profitable year in history, when my phone rang. Linda's name appeared on the screen, and I answered with the warmth I reserved for my children, despite their recent neglect. "Hello, sweetheart," I said, setting aside the financial documents that represented the empire I had built for their benefit. "Hi, Mom." Linda's voice came through with that particular tone she used when she was about to ask for something. "I wanted to call and let you know about our Thanksgiving plans this year." I waited, expecting her to ask what time she should arrive, whether she should bring anything, or perhaps to suggest a different date if the traditional Thursday didn't work for everyone. After all, Thanksgiving at the Westfield estate had been a family tradition for over 2 decades. The dining room could seat 20 people comfortably, and I had always taken pride in hosting the entire extended family for a feast that took me days to prepare. "We're doing something different this year," Linda continued, and I could hear the studied casualness in her voice. "Patricia found this amazing resort in Vermont that does a special Thanksgiving package. You know, all the food is prepared for you, there's entertainment, and the kids can go skiing. It's going to be so much more relaxing than cooking for everyone." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "That sounds lovely, dear. When should I pack?" The silence that followed was perhaps the loudest sound I had ever heard. When Linda finally spoke, her words were careful, measured, as if she had rehearsed them. "Well, the thing is, Mom, it's really designed for families with younger people. You know how you've been talking about your back bothering you, and the resort has a lot of activities that might be too strenuous. Plus, it's quite expensive, and we've already made the reservations." Each word landed like a physical blow. My back, which was perfectly fine, had become their excuse. The expense, which would have been nothing to me, was somehow prohibitive. The activities, which they hadn't bothered to describe, were supposedly too much for a woman who still worked 60-hour weeks and maintained 12 acres of property. "I see," I managed to say, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. "And James and Robert are going as well?" "Oh yes, everyone's so excited. James and Patricia are bringing the twins and Robert and Nicole are driving up from Boston. It's going to be like a real family vacation, you know? Something we haven't done in years." "Something we haven't done in years because you've all been too busy with your own lives to make time for family," I thought but didn't say. Instead, I found myself asking, "And what am I supposed to do for Thanksgiving?" Linda's laugh was bright and artificial. "Mom, you're always saying how much work the holidays are for you. This way, you can just relax, maybe order something nice from that restaurant you like. Think of it as a break. A break. From my own family. On the holiday that had always meant the most to me. The day when I had spent decades creating memories and traditions that apparently meant nothing to any of them. I was being given a break from being loved, from being included, from mattering. "Well," I said, surprised by how normal my voice sounded, "I suppose you've thought of everything." "I knew you'd understand, Mom. You're always so reasonable about these things. Oh, and before I forget, could you have accounting transfer my November allowance a few days early? The resort requires full payment up front." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. There it was, the real reason for the call. Not to invite me, not to include me, but to ensure that my money would fund the family gathering that I was explicitly excluded from. My reasonable, understanding mother was supposed to pay for the privilege of being left behind. "Of course, dear. I'll have Sarah take care of it first thing tomorrow." "You're the best, Mom. I'll call you after Thanksgiving and tell you all about it." After Thanksgiving. As if I would be sitting by the phone, eagerly waiting to hear about the wonderful time my family had without me. As if the stories of their joy would somehow compensate for my exclusion from it. "That would be lovely," I said. "Have a wonderful time." I ended the call and sat in my office, surrounded by the evidence of everything I had built for them. The quarterly reports showing record profits. The architectural plans for the new development project that would add another $20 million to the company's value, the legal documents that outlined their inheritance, the trust funds that ensured their comfort, the life insurance policies that guaranteed their security. For 43 years, I had been building their future. I had sacrificed my own dreams, my own desires, to create something that would outlast me and provide for generations of Chens to come. I had worked when they played, worried when they slept peacefully, and solved problems they never even knew existed. And now, when I was supposed to enjoy the fruits of that labor, when I was supposed to be surrounded by the family I had provided for, I was being discarded like an employee who had outlived her usefulness. I walked to the window of my office and looked out at the grounds of the estate. The maple trees were in full autumn glory, their leaves a brilliant tapestry of gold and crimson. The gardens I had planted were preparing for winter, the last of the chrysanthemums still blooming, in defiance of the cooling air. This was my sanctuary, the place I had created as a haven for my family, and I would be spending Thanksgiving here alone, while they enjoyed a vacation funded by my generosity. But as I stood there, something began to shift inside me. The hurt was still there, sharp and immediate, but it was being joined by something else, something harder and more focused. I had spent decades being the reasonable one, the understanding one, the one who put everyone else's needs before her own. I had been the matriarch who gave and gave and gave, never asking for anything in return except love and respect. It was time they learned what happened when they stopped providing even that. I turned away from the window and walked to my desk, where the latest version of my will sat in the top drawer. I had updated it just 6 months ago, ensuring that each of my children would inherit equal shares of the business, the properties, and the liquid assets that comprised the Chen fortune. They would never want for anything. Their children would be provided for, and their children's children would benefit from the empire I had built. But looking at those documents now, I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. Why was I rewarding their neglect? Why was I ensuring the comfort of people who couldn't be bothered to ensure mine? What message did it send when the person who built everything was treated as if she had built nothing at all? I opened my laptop and began typing an email to my attorney, Harold Fitzgerald, who had been handling the family's legal affairs for over 15 years. Harold was discreet, efficient, and had no sentimental attachment to my children that might cloud his professional judgment. Harold, I wrote, I need to schedule an appointment to discuss some significant changes to my estate planning documents. When is the earliest you can see me? This is time-sensitive. I sent the email and then did something I hadn't done in years. I poured myself a glass of the 30-year-old scotch that Richard had been saving for a special occasion that never came before his death. I sat in his favorite chair in the library, surrounded by the books we had collected together over the decades of our marriage, and I began to plan. They thought they could exclude me from Thanksgiving. They thought they could treat me as an inconvenience while still expecting to inherit everything I had worked for. They thought that my love for them was unconditional, that my generosity was guaranteed, that my place in their lives was whatever they decided it should be. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The next morning, Harold's response was waiting in my inbox. He could see me that very afternoon, and his tone suggested he understood the urgency. I spent the morning reviewing financial documents, making notes, and preparing for a conversation that would change everything. As I drove to Harold's office in downtown Hartford, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: excitement. For too long, I had been reactive, responding to my children's needs and demands while my own desires took a back seat. Today, I was going to be proactive. Today, I was going to take control of my own story. Harold's office was in one of the older buildings downtown, all dark wood and leather-bound law books that spoke to tradition and stability. He was a man in his 60s, silver-haired and impeccably dressed, who had guided me through the legal complexities of expanding the business and had always treated me with the respect that my own family seemed to have forgotten I deserved. Margaret, he said, rising from behind his mahogany desk as his secretary showed me in. You sounded quite determined in your email. What can I do for you? I settled into the chair across from his desk and placed my handbag carefully beside me. Harold, I need to completely restructure my estate plan. Everything. His eyebrows rose slightly, but his expression remained professionally neutral. May I ask what's prompted this decision? I told him about the Thanksgiving call, about the pattern of neglect that had been building for years, about the realization that I had been enabling their disrespect by continuing to reward it financially. Harold listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on the legal pad in front of him. I see, he said when I finished. And what kind of restructuring are you considering? I want to remove my children as beneficiaries of the estate entirely, I said, the words feeling powerful in my mouth. The business, the properties, the investments, the life insurance, all of it. Harold set down his pen and looked at me carefully. Margaret, that's a very significant decision. Have you considered the ramifications? The shock this will cause? The potential for legal challenges? I've considered everything, I replied, and I want to make sure it's ironclad. They need to understand that their inheritance was never guaranteed. It was contingent on them treating me with basic human decency, and they've failed that test. Where would you like the assets to go instead? I had been thinking about this all morning. I want to establish a foundation, the Richard and Margaret Chen Foundation for Educational Excellence. It will provide scholarships for first-generation college students, particularly those from immigrant families who understand the value of hard work and family loyalty. Harold made more notes, his expression thoughtful. That's a beautiful legacy, Margaret. But I have to ask, is this a permanent decision, or are you hoping it might serve as a wake-up call for your children? I considered his question carefully. Was I hoping they would change? Was this an elaborate punishment, designed to bring them back to their senses? Or was I finally accepting the reality of who they had become and making decisions based on that reality, rather than on my hopes for who they might yet be? Harold, I said finally, I'm 72 years old. I don't have time to hope they'll become different people. I need to make decisions based on who they are right now, and right now, they're people who exclude their mother from family gatherings while expecting to inherit her fortune. If they change, truly change, then perhaps I'll reconsider. But that change has to come from them, not from the threat of losing their inheritance. He nodded slowly. All right. When would you like this to take effect? Immediately. I want the new will drafted and executed before Thanksgiving. I want to know that when they're enjoying their family vacation without me, it's the last time they'll do it on my dime. Harold spent the next hour explaining the legal requirements, the documentation needed, and the timeline for completing the changes. We scheduled another appointment for Friday morning to review the final documents, which would give him time to draft everything properly and give me time to make sure I was certain about this decision. As I drove home from Harold's office, I felt lighter than I had in years. For the first time in decades, I was making decisions based on my own needs and values rather than on my children's expectations. I was taking control of my own narrative instead of allowing them to write me out of theirs. The rest of the week passed in a strange state of suspended animation. James called once to ask about a business matter, but didn't mention Thanksgiving. Robert sent a text asking if I could cover his food truck's insurance payment, which was overdue. Patricia called to complain about something Linda had said during their planning call for the Vermont trip. None of them seemed to notice or care about my unusual quietness. Friday morning arrived gray and cold, with the promise of an early winter in the air. I dressed carefully for my appointment with Harold, choosing the navy blue suit I had worn to close the biggest deal in the company's history. If this was the day I was taking control of my legacy, I wanted to look like the formidable businesswoman I had always been. Harold's secretary offered me coffee, which I accepted, and I sat in the waiting area looking through the morning paper. There was an article about family businesses and the challenges of succession planning, and I wondered if the reporter had any idea how complicated those challenges could become when the family itself fell apart. "Margaret?" Harold appeared in the doorway to his office, a thick folder in his hands. "Ready to make history?" The new will was comprehensive and thorough. Harold had included provisions for the Foundation's board of directors, operational guidelines, and specific criteria for scholarship recipients. He had also included a detailed explanation of my reasoning, written in language that would make it nearly impossible for my children to challenge the document successfully. "There's one more thing," Harold said as I reviewed the final pages. "Have you considered how you want them to find out about this?" I looked up from the documents. "What do you mean?" "Well, typically, the contents of a will aren't disclosed until after death. But given the circumstances and given that you hope this might prompt some self-reflection on their part, you might want to consider telling them directly." The idea of confronting them with their loss had occurred to me, but I had dismissed it as unnecessarily dramatic. Now, however, I realized that Harold might be right. If I truly wanted them to understand the consequences of their behavior, they needed to know about those consequences while there was still time for them to matter. "After Thanksgiving," I said, "let them enjoy their vacation. Let them spend my money and celebrate their family unity without me. And then when they come home happy and relaxed, thinking everything will continue as it always has, I'll tell them the truth." Harold nodded approvingly. "That seems fitting." I signed the documents with a sense of finality that was both terrifying and liberating. With a few strokes of my pen, I had fundamentally altered the future of my family, removed the safety net they had always taken for granted, and redirected a fortune toward people who would truly appreciate its value. As I left Harold's office, the signed will secured in my handbag, I realized that I had just done something my children would have considered impossible. I had put my own needs first. I had made a decision based on my own values rather than their expectations. I had finally, after 7 decades of life, learned to say no. Now all that remained was to see what they would do when they learned that their mother, the woman they had excluded from their celebration, had just excluded them from their inheritance. The weekend passed quietly. I spent Saturday in my garden, preparing the flower beds for winter and enjoying the solitude I was learning to appreciate. Sunday. I attended church alone, as I had been doing for months since my children had stopped making even the pretense of joining me for weekly service. Monday brought the first real test of my resolve. James called with a proposal for expanding the company's presence in Florida, a project that would require significant capital investment and his personal relocation to oversee operations. He spoke with the casual confidence of someone who assumed his mother's financial backing was guaranteed, someone who had never questioned whether his inheritance would be there to fund his ambitions. "It's a perfect opportunity, Mom," he said, his voice bright with enthusiasm. "The market down there is exploding, and we could easily double our revenue within 5 years. I've already started looking at houses in Naples. Patricia's excited about the weather." I listened to his plans, his assumptions, his casual expectation that I would fund his Florida dreams, and I felt a calm certainty that I had made the right decision. This was exactly the attitude that had led to my exclusion from Thanksgiving, the assumption that I existed to facilitate their desires without regard for my own feelings or needs. "That sounds very ambitious, James," I said neutrally. "Have you prepared a formal business proposal with projected costs and revenue streams?" He laughed. "Mom, you know I'm good for it. The Chen Development Group has never had a project fail under my supervision." Of course, the Chen Development Group had never had a project succeed under his supervision either, since I had been the one making all the actual decisions while he took credit for the results. But pointing that out would only lead to an argument, and I had better ways to make my point. "Why don't you put together a comprehensive presentation?" I suggested. "Include everything, Market analysis, financial projections, risk assessment. We can discuss it after the holidays. After the holidays. After I had told him that his inheritance was gone and his expensive Florida dreams would have to be funded by his own resources. After he learned that the gravy train he had been riding his entire adult life had finally reached its last station. Tuesday and Wednesday passed in a blur of routine activities. I finalized some business matters, arranged for the house staff to have Thanksgiving off since I would be dining alone, and confirmed my appointment with Harold for the following Monday, when we would begin setting up the foundation. Wednesday evening, I received a flurry of texts from Vermont. Photos of the resort, pictures of my grandchildren skiing, images of the elaborate Thanksgiving spread that the resort was providing. Linda sent a video of the family toasting each other in the resort's dining room, everyone looking relaxed and happy in their beautiful Vermont setting. "Wish you were here." The message accompanying the video said, but we both knew that was a lie. If they had wished I were there, I would have been there. If they had wanted my company, they would have arranged for my company. Instead, they were enjoying the vacation my money had funded while reminding me of everything I was missing. I watched the video once, noted how genuinely happy they all looked without me, and then deleted it. Tomorrow, while they were celebrating their family unity, I would be having Thanksgiving dinner alone in the house I had built for family gatherings that no longer included me. But for the first time in years, I wasn't dreading the solitude. Instead, I was looking forward to the peace. Thursday morning dawned clear and cold, with frost covering the lawn and the last of the autumn leaves clinging stubbornly to the oak, trees that lined the driveway. I had slept better than I had in weeks, and I woke with a sense of purpose that surprised me. I spent the morning cooking, not the elaborate feast I usually prepared for 12 or 15 people, but a simple, elegant meal for one. Cornish game hen with herb stuffing, roasted root vegetables from my garden, and a small pumpkin pie that I made from scratch because the ritual of cooking had always been meditative for me. As I worked in the kitchen, I found myself thinking about all the Thanksgivings past, all the years I had spent cooking for people who attended out of obligation rather than joy. How many times had I stressed over the perfect menu, the proper table settings, the elaborate centerpieces, all to impress family members who were counting the minutes until they could leave. This year, I set the table in the breakfast nook instead of the formal dining room. I used my everyday dishes instead of the china that had belonged to my mother. I arranged a simple bouquet of the last chrysanthemums from the garden instead of ordering an expensive floral arrangement. Everything was smaller, simpler, and somehow more authentic than the productions I had been staging for years. At exactly noon, I sat down to my solitary Thanksgiving dinner. I had considered inviting someone, Harold and his wife perhaps, or some of the other widows from church. But ultimately, I decided that this Thanksgiving needed to be about me, learning to be comfortable with my own company, about recognizing that being alone was not the same as being lonely. I raised my glass of wine in a toast to the empty chair across from me. "To new beginnings," I said aloud, and my voice echoed slightly in the quiet room. "To learning the difference between being excluded and choosing solitude. And to the end of rewarding people who don't appreciate what they have." The meal was delicious, perhaps because I had cooked it for someone who truly appreciated the effort. The game hen was perfectly seasoned, the vegetables were tender and flavorful, and the pie was exactly as sweet as I liked it. I ate slowly, savoring each bite and enjoying the silence that was broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. After dinner, I took a walk around the grounds, bundled up against the November chill. The estate looked beautiful, in its autumn dormancy, peaceful and dignified in the late afternoon light. This was my sanctuary, the place I had created through decades of hard work and careful planning. Whether I shared it with family or enjoyed it alone, it was mine, and it would always reflect my values and my vision. As the sun began to set, Painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I received a call from Linda. I could hear laughter and conversation in the background, the sounds of my family enjoying their celebration without me. "Hi, Mom. We just finished dinner and wanted to call and say Happy Thanksgiving. The food here was incredible, and the kids are having such a great time. I wish you could see them skiing. They're getting so good." I wish you could see them skiing, as if I were somehow unable to travel, somehow incapable of enjoying winter sports, somehow too frail or too boring to be included in family activities. As if my absence was my choice rather than theirs. "That sounds wonderful, dear," I said, my voice warm and pleasant. "I'm so glad you're all having a good time. What did you end up doing today? Did you go to that restaurant you like?" "Actually, I cooked," I said. "A lovely dinner, very peaceful. I've been thinking about a lot of things." "Oh, that's nice. Well, we should probably get back. Robert's telling some story about his food truck that has everyone cracking up, but we'll call you when we get home, okay?" "Of course. Enjoy the rest of your evening." I ended the call and stood in my kitchen, surrounded by the dishes from my solitary meal, and realized something important. I wasn't angry anymore. The hurt was still there, but the rage that had driven me to Harold's office had transformed into something calmer and more resolute. I had made my decision based on clear thinking rather than emotional reaction, and I was comfortable with the consequences. My family was having a wonderful time without me, which proved that they didn't actually need me in their lives. They needed my money, they needed the security I provided, they needed the business I had built, but they didn't need me. And if they didn't need me, then I was free to make decisions based on my own needs rather than theirs. As I cleaned up the kitchen, I thought about the phone call I would make on Monday, the conversation that would change everything. I would invite them all to dinner, just as I had been doing for years. But this time, instead of serving them a meal, I would be serving them a reality they had never imagined possible. The woman they had excluded from their Thanksgiving was about to exclude them from their future. And unlike their decision, mine would have consequences that lasted far beyond a single holiday weekend. Friday morning brought an email that would have made me laugh if it weren't so perfectly predictable. Robert had sent a lengthy message detailing his latest business crisis, complete with spreadsheets showing how close his food truck venture was to bankruptcy and a heartfelt plea for another emergency loan of $50,000 to keep the dream alive. "Mom, I know I've asked for help before, but this is different," his email read. "We're so close to turning the corner. The Thanksgiving weekend was a total wash because we were in Vermont, and now we're behind on rent for the truck's parking space. If we lose that spot, we lose everything. I promise this is the last time I'll need to ask for financial assistance. The last time." I had heard that promise at least 6 times over the past 2 years, and each time Robert had managed to convince himself that his failures were due to circumstances beyond his control, rather than his complete lack of business acumen. His food truck served gourmet grilled cheese sandwiches at premium prices, targeting a market that he had never bothered to research and competing against established restaurants with decades of customer loyalty. I forwarded the email to Harold, without comment. He would need to see the kind of financial pressure my children were accustomed to applying, the casual way they assumed my resources were available to cover their mistakes. This wasn't a son asking his mother for help. This was a business partner expecting unlimited funding from an investor who had never agreed to the terms. By Monday afternoon, the family had returned from Vermont, and the photos began appearing on social media. Patricia had posted dozens of images from their weekend, each one more irritating than the last. The family gathered around a beautifully set table at the resort, everyone dressed in coordinated autumn colors like models in a lifestyle magazine. James carving turkey with theatrical precision while the twins applauded. Linda and Marcus toasting each other with expensive wine against the backdrop of snow-covered mountains. But it was the final photo that crystallized everything I had been feeling. The entire family was posed on the resort's grand staircase, arms around each other, faces glowing with happiness and satisfaction. The caption read, "So grateful for family and for the chance to make new traditions together." Sometimes the best Thanksgivings happen when you step outside your comfort zone. Step outside your comfort zone. As if excluding their mother had been a brave adventure rather than a calculated cruelty. As if abandoning decades of family tradition had been growth rather than selfishness. As if my absence had been the thing that made their celebration complete. I screenshot the photo and saved it to a folder on my computer labeled Evidence. Not evidence for any legal proceeding, but evidence for myself. Proof that I had made the right decision. These were not people who missed me, who felt guilty about leaving me behind, or who regretted their choice. These were people who were genuinely happier without me, and I needed to remember that when my resolve wavered. Tuesday evening brought the call I had been expecting. James phoned to ask if I wanted to hear about their trip, his voice bright with the satisfaction of someone who had enjoyed a perfect vacation. He described the resort in detail, the excellent service, the beautiful scenery, and the joy of watching his children experience snow for the first time. "Patricia's already talking about making it an annual tradition," he said enthusiastically. "The kids loved it so much, and it was so much easier than hosting at home. No cooking, no cleaning, no stress. Just pure family time. No stress because I wasn't there to create stress, apparently. No cooking because I wasn't there to demand home-cooked meals. No cleaning because I wasn't there to notice if things weren't perfect. Their ideal family time was family time without me." "It sounds wonderful," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "I'm glad you all enjoyed yourselves." "We really did. And Mom, I wanted to talk to you about that Florida expansion I mentioned. I've been thinking about it the whole weekend, and I'm more convinced than ever that it's the right move. When can we sit down and go over the numbers?" There it was again, the seamless transition from describing how much better their vacation was without me to asking for my financial backing for his dreams. The cognitive dissonance was stunning. I was simultaneously irrelevant to their happiness and essential to their prosperity. "Let's plan something for next week," I said. "I have some things to take care of first, but then we can discuss your proposal in detail." "Perfect. I'll put together a presentation that'll knock your socks off. This is going to be huge, Mom. Really huge." After I hung up, I sat in my home office looking at the quarterly reports that James had never bothered to fully understand. The company's success wasn't due to his vision or leadership. It was due to my careful planning, my strategic investments, and my willingness to make difficult decisions when they were necessary. James had never made a difficult decision in his life, and now he was about to face the most difficult one of all, learning to live without a safety net he had never appreciated. Wednesday brought a surprise visit from Linda, who arrived unannounced, with coffee and pastries from an expensive bakery in Hartford. She breezed into my kitchen with the studied casualness of someone who was trying to soften me up for something, arranging the pastries on one of my good plates and making coffee as if this were a perfectly normal occurrence. "I was in the neighborhood," she lied smoothly, settling into the chair across from me at the kitchen table. "I thought we could catch up properly. Vermont was amazing, but it went by so fast that I feel like I barely talked to anyone. Barely talked to anyone except the family members you actually wanted to spend time with," I thought, but didn't say. Instead, I accepted the coffee she offered and waited for her to reveal the real purpose of her visit. "The resort was incredible," she continued, launching into a detailed description of amenities I would never experience. "The spa was world-class, and they had this amazing art gallery featuring local Vermont artists. It really inspired me. I'm thinking about applying for a residency program they mentioned, something that would let me spend a whole month there next summer working on my sculpture." "That sounds like a wonderful opportunity," I said, though we both knew that Linda's sculpture career existed mainly in her imagination and my monthly allowance transfers. "The thing is," she said, finally getting to the point, "the residency requires a significant investment. Not just for the program fees, but for materials, studio rental, accommodation. It's about $30,000 total,